I've been sentenced to death in Missouri for the 2005 murder of William Mcinty. I want the world and the government to know that that moment doesn't define me. I've grown, I'm a better person.
Gentlemen, we're just outside of the Kirkwood Police Department this morning. Those here are among the many who have been closely watching this case. Johnson was convicted in 2007 of killing Kirkwood Police Sergeant William Mcinty. The case has been in the spotlight for years, but now with the Missouri Supreme Court decision, Johnson could be put to death as soon as 6 p.m. tonight in Bonne Terre.
To some people, he was a cold-blooded murderer. A man who ambushed a police officer, shot him 5 times, then came back to finish the job. To others, he was a grieving brother, consumed by rage after watching police stand by while his 12-year-old brother collapsed in front of their home and died without help. On November 29, 2022, the state of Missouri strapped Kelvin Johnson to the gurney and carried out his execution by lethal injection. A fate almost guaranteed in states like Missouri when someone kills a cop. 10 minutes later, Kelvin took his last breath, leaving behind a daughter too young to legally witness his death. This is the story of Kelvin Johnson, his final 24 hours, his last meal, his last words, and the murder that sealed his fate nearly 2 decades earlier. But to truly understand why Missouri sent Kelvin to death row, we have to go back. Back to July 5, 2005. The day his little brother collapsed in the driveway, and the day Officer William Mcinty's life ended in a hail of bullets. What really happened that day? Was this justice, or something much more complicated? If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more intense death row documentaries. Tap the bell icon so you never miss an execution case that shakes the system. And don't forget to drop a comment below. Was this justice, or did Kelvin Johnson deserve mercy? On the afternoon of July 5, 2005, Kirkwood police showed up at Kelvin's family home with a warrant. They were looking for Kelvin over a minor probation violation from his teenage years. But Kelvin wasn't even inside the house. He was across the street, in a nearby building, watching everything unfold from a distance. Officers, including Sergeant William Mcinty, followed strict procedure. Believing Kelvin might be hiding and possibly armed, they ordered everyone out of the house and began a full sweep. The family tried to cooperate, but in the chaos, something terrible happened. Bam Bam, who had a serious congenital heart condition, suddenly began gasping for air. His breathing grew shallow. His body stiffened. His legs gave out on the porch. Their mother tried to run back inside to reach him, but Sergeant Mcinty stopped her, insisting the area had to be cleared first. Kelvin, watching from across the way, said he saw it all, the officers walking past his brother while he was clearly struggling to breathe. No one rendered aid. No one called for help. By the time they completed the search and finally called an ambulance, Bam Bam was already unresponsive. Kelvin said he stood there frozen as the paramedics rolled the gurney into the yard. His brother's legs were stretched out stiff, lifeless. That's it, Kelvin later recalled thinking. He's dead. At the hospital, doctors confirmed his worst fear. Bam Bam had died from heart failure. Kelvin was devastated and enraged. 5 hours later, he would spot Sergeant Mcinty again, alone in a patrol car, responding to a fireworks complaint. And that's when Kelvin Johnson snapped. The sun was setting over Meacham Park, a small, tight-knit, historically black neighborhood in Kirkwood, Missouri, when Sergeant William Mcinty returned for a routine call. A fireworks disturbance had been reported. Nothing major. Another officer had originally picked it up, but Mcinty offered to take it since he was already nearby. What Sergeant Mcinty didn't know was that Kelvin Johnson was still in the neighborhood, burning with grief. Hours earlier, Kelvin had watched his little brother, Joseph Bam Bam Long, collapse and die from a heart condition. Kelvin blamed the police. He believed their delay, their cold adherence to protocol, had cost his brother his life. And now, seeing Sergeant Mcinty back in Meacham Park, the same officer who had stopped their mother from helping Bam Bam, Kelvin snapped. He stepped out from a nearby building, eyes locked on the patrol car. "You killed my brother," he shouted. Before Mcinty could react, Kelvin Johnson raised a stolen 9mm handgun and opened fire. 5 shots. The bullets tore through the windshield and into Mcinty's body. The sergeant was hit multiple times, bleeding, but still alive. Instinct took over. He floored the accelerator, trying to drive himself to safety, maybe to a hospital. He made it about a block before his patrol car slammed into a tree and came to a stop. That should have been the end of it. But Kelvin Johnson wasn't finished. He approached the vehicle again. Mcinty had fallen out, lying halfway on the ground, gasping for breath. Johnson stood over him, raised the gun again, and fired 2 more shots. One into Mcinty's back, one into his head. Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the shattered body of a 43-year-old husband, father of 3, and 20-year police veteran. The neighborhood erupted into chaos. Sirens filled the air. Officers poured into Meacham Park as news of the shooting spread. A manhunt began immediately. To the police, it was a targeted execution of one of their own. The media labeled Kelvin a cop killer, the most unforgivable title in American law enforcement. Killing a police officer in a state like Missouri, which still enforces the death penalty, is practically a guaranteed trip to death row. But for Kelvin Johnson, this wasn't about the law. It wasn't about calculated revenge. It was raw, emotional, and personal. He believed Sergeant Mcinty let his brother die. And in that moment, under the weight of his grief, he saw only one way to balance the pain. But while the shooting may have lasted seconds, the consequences would stretch on for 17 years, through courtroom battles, racial justice protests, and eventually to a gurney inside the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic, and Correctional Center. Before the shooting, before death row, before the lethal injection, there was just Kelvin, a boy growing up in the cracks of a broken home. By the time Kelvin Johnson turned 5, he already knew what pain looked like. His father was serving a life sentence for second-degree murder. And while his dad sat behind bars, his mother fell into cocaine addiction, struggling to raise her children in the tough neighborhood of Meacham Park, Missouri. It was during this time that she got pregnant by another man, while Kelvin's father was still in prison. The child would be Joseph Bam Bam Long, Kelvin's half-brother. From the moment Bam Bam was born, he fought to stay alive. He had a severe congenital heart condition that required surgery just days after delivery. Doctors didn't expect him to make it far. But against the odds, Bam Bam survived. Though his heart was never the same. He lived with the disease every single day. And Kelvin, still just a teenager, stepped up like a father. He fed Bam Bam, bathed him, walked him to school each morning, helped with his breathing treatments, stayed up during his hospital nights. In a house full of dysfunction, Kelvin became his little brother's safe space. People in the neighborhood knew it. Kelvin was protective, caring, gentle when it came to Bam Bam. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the monster the headlines would one day claim either. At the time of the crime in July 2005, Kelvin Johnson was 19 years old. Still legally an adult, but emotionally, he was a boy shaped by chaos. A boy who had never known stability, structure, or love that didn't come with pain. When Bam Bam collapsed and died on the porch that day, something inside Kelvin cracked. And what followed was tragedy on both sides. After Sergeant William Mcinty was gunned down in the streets of Meacham Park, a manhunt swept through Kirkwood, Missouri. The suspect wasn't a mystery. Witnesses had seen Kelvin Johnson flee the scene, and the motive, at least to police, seemed painfully clear. By the next morning, July 6, 2005, officers located Johnson hiding inside his older sister's apartment. He surrendered without a fight. No shootout. No resistance. Just a broken 19-year-old who had just watched his little brother die, and took a life in return. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, a charge that made him eligible for the death penalty. During the trial, the prosecution painted Kelvin as a cold-blooded cop killer, saying he waited for Mcinty, ambushed him, and executed him in broad daylight. They highlighted how Kelvin had fired 5 shots initially, then returned to shoot the wounded officer in the back and head while he lay helpless outside his patrol car. But the defense told a different story, of a traumatized young man who snapped in the middle of unbearable grief. They argued that Kelvin didn't plan the murder, that it was impulsive, emotional, and the act of a broken heart, not a premeditated killer. The jury didn't fully buy it. They found him guilty of first-degree murder, but couldn't agree on a death sentence. However, the judge stepped in. Using Missouri law, the judge overruled the jury's deadlock and sentenced Kelvin Johnson to death. That's when the controversy began. Civil rights groups, legal experts, and even some jurors raised red flags. They said the prosecutor, Bob McCulloch, had a history of aggressively seeking the death penalty, especially against black defendants, and particularly in cases involving police victim process. He filed motions to vacate Johnson's sentence, calling the case a textbook example of selective prosecution. Meanwhile, Kelvin sat on death row for over 17 years, while his lawyers filed appeals, motions, and clemency requests, each time pointing to racial bias, prosecutorial misconduct, and a broken system. But in the end, the state wouldn't budge. November 28, 2022. It was just another cold Monday morning inside Potosi Correctional Center. But for Kelvin Johnson, this was the final sunrise he'd ever see. By 6 a.m., he was awake. He hadn't slept much. Who could? The air in the death watch cell was heavy with a kind of silence that only comes when time runs out. Every sound, keys jingling, footsteps echoing, could have been the one that came to say, "It's time." Kelvin knew the drill. He'd been on death row for 17 years, watching others walk the same corridor toward Missouri's execution chamber in Bonne Terre. But today the walk was his. There was no last-minute miracle. The U.S. Supreme Court had rejected his final appeal just hours earlier. Missouri's governor, Mike Parson, announced that clemency would not be granted. Mr. Johnson's crime was horrific, the governor said in a cold official statement, adding that the execution would proceed as scheduled at 6 p.m. Outside the prison, hundreds of protesters gathered. They carried signs, candles, and wore shirts with "Justice for Kelvin" printed across their chests. Ministers, students, activists, and families stood together in freezing weather, chanting and praying. The strongest voice among them was at least 21 to attend executions. The court denied her request. She wouldn't be allowed to hold her father's hand or hear his last breath. It broke her. "My dad is the most important person in my life," Corey said in a public statement. "The state is robbing me of the chance to say goodbye." Inside the prison, Kelvin already knew the decision. He didn't protest it. He was heartbroken for Corey, but resigned. He had spent decades reconciling with what was coming. For his last meal, Kelvin requested the standard prison tray. There was no extravagant final dinner. Just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some scrambled eggs, cereal, and a cup of milk, the same food served to every other inmate that day. He didn't ask for anything special. He didn't want pity. As the hour drew near, the guards entered his cell quietly. Kelvin stood up. No resistance. He walked slowly but with dignity, flanked by officers on either side. At 5:30 p.m., he was escorted to the execution chamber at Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. Outside, the protests grew louder. Clergy members and even Kim Gardner, the St. Louis Circuit Attorney who had supported a re-examination of Kelvin's case, pleaded for a stay. They claimed racial bias had tainted the case from the very start, that Johnson was not sentenced to death because of the severity of the crime, but because of who he was, a poor black man who had killed a white police officer. Even Special Prosecutor E. Keenan had filed a 20-page brief outlining how Johnson had been selectively prosecuted. But no court would listen. At 6:45 p.m., Kelvin was already strapped to the gurney. He turned his head and looked at the witnesses on the other side of the glass. Among them were members of Mcinty's family. Kelvin had said repeatedly that he never hated the officer, but believed the system that let his little brother die had also led him down this path. When asked if he had any final words, Kelvin's voice was calm. "I am sorry for what I did," he said. "I am not the same person that I was. I love my daughter. I love my family. I love my supporters. Thank you for fighting for me. God is good." At 7 p.m., the lethal injection began. By 7:40 p.m., Kelvin Johnson was pronounced dead. Corey wasn't there. She sat in a waiting area, crying, holding a letter Kelvin had written her just the night before. In that final message, he told her to live her life, be strong, and keep telling the truth about what happened. Not just about his case, but about the entire system that allowed something like this to happen. The truth about what happened is that justice did not belong to you. If you had fought this legally, maybe your brother would have gotten the justice he deserved, and your life would have been spared. Outside the prison gates, as the sun finally disappeared into the winter sky, the crowd stood in silence. Some held candles, some prayed, some screamed, but all of them knew something wasn't right. The truth is, justice in America doesn't always come wearing a blindfold. Kevin Johnson pulled the trigger, yes. He waited, he aimed, and he ended the life of Sergeant William Mcinty. But what pushed him there wasn't just rage, it was grief. It was trauma. It was a broken system that watched his little brother die without offering help, that caged his father for murder, that handed him poverty, addiction, and pain before he even learned how to read. Was he guilty? Yes. But was he born guilty? No. The state gave him a needle, not a second chance. And when he asked to say goodbye to his daughter, just 19, they told her she was too young to witness her father's last breath. So we ask again, was this justice? Or was this vengeance in a suit? I think it was justice. R.I.P. to Officer McT and Kelvin Johnson.